This visionary leadership call is titled Reinventing Leadership Paradigms of Organization as Mirrors of Consciousness. This call was hosted live on the School of Imagination Discord server on Friday, June 20th, 2025. These calls do take place each week on Fridays at 3 p.m. And if you'd like to join us live, you can become a free member of the Discord server, and the invite link is in the video description below. Enjoy the call. Okay, so in the chat, I placed a photo of the book, Reinventing Organizations. That's where these ideas are coming from. And kind of a fun story about this. So, my older brother is a consultant to organizations that are going through a lot of change, kind of like a change management consultant. And so he came into contact with Frédéric Laloux's work on reinventing organizations. And when I told him about the School of Imagination and what we're building in the Guild, he said, "Oh, I have the perfect book for you." And so he mailed this book to me, and it has been an absolute feast for the imagination. I love it so much. It takes so many of the mystic ideas that we talk about in the School of Imagination spaces, such as Sunday Mystery School and Brave Mystic Training, and the Neville and Chill podcast. Takes all these ideas that we tend to talk about in the frame of personal evolution, and it paints these pictures of what it looks like to have our organizations evolve to also reach like a mirror-like reflection of individual evolution. So as we, as humans, are individually evolving as consciousness, the way that we organize ourselves begins to evolve as well. And this book, Reinventing Organizations by Frédéric Laloux, is a blueprint for how those paradigms work, and it really maps it out. And it's been just fascinating to look at it. So we're going to do that. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a cliff notes on this, and obviously you can choose to pick up the book if you find that the concepts resonate with you. But you're going to get a lot just out of hearing me talk about it today. So I put two things in the chat. Let me re-put them in because I put them in a minute ago. Okay, this is a reference image. Okay, and with that, let's see. Welcome, Ariel, Stasio, Harmony, Ashley, Nick, Ray, Orlena, Joseph, Early Jones, and Sandy. Awesome, welcome. Thanks for hopping on a Friday afternoon to talk about visionary leadership. All right, so welcome everybody. You could be anywhere right now. It's a Friday afternoon after all. But you chose to be here, and that means you chose presence. You chose alignment, and you chose leadership. Not as a title or performance, but as a living practice. So today we open the next layer in this visionary leadership series by exploring a profound idea. The way we organize ourselves, is a mirror of our consciousness. The way we collectively organize ourselves to work together to accomplish objectives is a mirror of our consciousness. The structures we build, the systems we create, the way we lead, these are not separate from our inner world. They are extensions and expressions of our worldview, our self-image, and our beliefs about power, purpose, and possibility. And considered in that sense, organization itself becomes sacred. It becomes a spiritual artifact, revealing how far we've come and where we are still being called to grow. So, to help us make sense of this, I want to introduce the work of Frédéric Laloux. Frédéric is a former McKinsey consultant who walked away from corporate life to study a different question. His question is, what if organizations could evolve the way human consciousness evolves? I'm going to say that again. What if organizations could evolve the way human consciousness evolves? Rather than trying to fix outdated structures, Frédéric immersed himself in studying what actually works for soulful, purposeful, deeply alive organizations in today's world. His book, Reinventing Organizations, has quietly become one of the most important manifestos of 21st century leadership. It is not a book about business in the traditional sense. It's more like a sacred mirror, reflecting what becomes possible when we lead not from fear, but from presence. At the core of the work, Laloux has identified a pattern. The way humans organize has shifted over millennia in tandem with our evolving view of the world. Now, to make this easy to relate to, Frédéric maps these shifts through color-coded stages. And these are not intended to be viewed as hierarchy, but rather a spiral, an unfolding spiral, a spiral that expresses a maturing, a complexity, and consciousness. These stages, mapped through these color codes, range from the reactive, power-driven red systems of tribal dominance to the achievement-focused orange models of modern corporations, and also identify a newly emerging form called Teal. That's T-E-A-L, that's a color, Teal. And Teal is an evolutionary model of organizations where power is decentralized, meaning that the members of this organization self-manage. In a Teal organization, people bring their whole selves, their wholeness. And the organization itself, rather than being guided by external pressures, a Teal organization listens to its own purpose, its evolutionary purpose. Now, we're going to unpack these stages in a few minutes, and you may find yourself recognizing patterns. Maybe you see elements of these different stages in a company that you work for now or have worked for in the past, or maybe in your team right now. Maybe you can see elements of these stages manifesting in your creative work, or maybe even your spiritual community. But more importantly, we'll reflect together on this core question. What frequency are you leading from? What frequency are you leading from? And what is being asked of you next? See in the chat, this sounds almost like the decentralized nervous system of an octopus. Fascia first. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so this evolution of organizational structures is also matching our evolution of consciousness, which is also matching our evolving understanding of how the systems in the world work. You bring up the example of the octopus. It's a perfect example. In Brave Mystic training the other night, we were talking about how an octopus does not have a single brain. They don't have a single, control processing, signal center. Rather, the octopus, its brain is its fascia. It's decentralized. Okay, so getting back to our core question here, what frequency are we leading from? Here's the deeper truth. We cannot build soul-aligned projects using models of organizational structures that are rooted in control. And we cannot create a liberated future if we're leading from outdated frequencies. Because the new world will not be built from the old paradigm. So, take a breath with me. And let's feel into the part of ourselves that already knows this. The part of us that is not just building things, but birthing living systems. And the part of ourselves who leads not from authority, but from alignment. So let's begin. All right, so we're going to start by exploring the model that Frédéric gives us. And yes, we are on a first name basis. Thanks, Frédéric. This model is the color stages. Each stage represents not just a different style of management, but it also represents a specific world view, meaning a way of seeing people, power, purpose, and progress. We're going to go through these stages like stages of human development, because that is what they are. They represent humanity's collective maturation and also your own personal leadership evolution. So our goal here is to take these in not just intellectually, but somatically. And consider, where does each of these stages live in your body? Where have you operated from so far, and where are you being called? Okay, now I'm going to kind of take notes in the chat here because, again, we don't want to engage with these only intellectually, but there is intellect here. So to make it easy, I'm going to kind of note take in the chat by copying and pasting some of the key ideas from the book. And let's start going through the stages. Okay, so we're going to go for up to an hour today. And if we don't make it through everything, we will continue this conversation next Friday on the next Visionary Leadership Call. Okay, so let's start by mapping through the stages. So just to give you an overview, there's red, amber, orange, green, and teal. Okay, so let's start by taking a look at what red is. So red is considered the impulsive paradigm. A red organization operates like a wolf pack or like a tribe with a chief. And the main idea of how power flows through a red organization is that it's power through fear. Okay, so it's, if you step out of line, you're going to be disciplined, you might lose something. So power is maintained through this rigid structure, and ultimately people stay in line because they're afraid to step out of line. Okay, so you can imagine this structure is very top down, it's very command based. Leadership operates in a red organization through dominance, through control, and also tends to be pretty impulsive in its responses. Okay, when I think of a red organization, I think of the cartels, that are trafficking and all sorts of different things and tend to be very violent. Okay, so people are afraid of the cartels, and that's why a lot of people don't stand up to cartels, because of fear, or the people that are in the cartel, they stay in because they're afraid. So what are the strengths of a red organization? Well, you can imagine if they're impulsive, that means they're able to take quick action. And if you think about the type of organization that a cartel is, the reason why cartels and red organizations in general exist is because they tend to survive and sometimes even thrive in dangerous environments. Okay, so that's their strengths: quick action, even in chaos, and survival in dangerous environments. And on the shadow side, they tend to be unstable. They tend to be pretty violent or brutal. Now, violent, when I say violent, that doesn't necessarily mean that all red organizations are literally physically conducting acts of violence. Violence can also just be in communication. Like there's violent communication, and even if it's not physical, in the way that it's expressed. Okay, so brutality, violence, instability, unpredictability are the shadow aspects of a red impulsive paradigm organization. Okay, so some more examples. We talked about cartels. Street gangs tend to operate in a similar way. Early mafia groups, early meaning before they became sophisticated in their governance structures as they are today. Back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe the early 2000s, a lot of mafia structures were rather red and impulsive. If you think about some more unstable regions of the world that have tribes led by warlords, okay, that would be an example of a red impulsive paradigm of organizational structure. And of course, any regime that is authoritarian in nature is going to really fall into this red category. Okay, so let's put this in a mystic frame. Okay, so in a mystic parallel, these people are leading from their root chakra, right? Their root chakra. They're like, this is all about survival. And this is about like really survival at all costs. It's all about fight or flight, dominance, protection. This is leadership that is what we could call pre-moral. Okay, they're not thinking about morality. There's no time for that in a red impulsive paradigm. This is pre-moral leadership. They're just reacting. Okay, now this can be necessary and even helpful in crisis, but clearly, as we've all seen, it is destructive when it is prolonged. Okay, these organizations do not tend to live very long, right? Because they self-destruct over longer periods of time. Okay, so that's the red organization. And again, we're mapping through the various stages because it's through contrast that we can begin to understand what the new stage of human consciousness and thus human organizational structures is. Okay, so let's talk about the next color of organization, and that is amber, an amber organization. Okay, and again, note-taking in the chat here. So an amber organization, we could call it a conformist paradigm. A conformist paradigm. Okay, so I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force. And when I was reading this book and learning about amber organizations, I saw a lot of military centralized control structures that I was indoctrinated into through, basic military training and, my technical school and my time, as an enlisted airman. It's very much all about conform in order for the organization to work. Everybody has to conform. Okay, so that's why they cut everybody's hair and put everybody in a uniform, and everybody operates under the same code and is indoctrinated and trained in the same way. So yes, the metaphor is the army or military organizations. There's also a lot of amber characteristics in organized religion. The Catholic Church hierarchy comes to mind. This conformist paradigm of you have to follow these dogmatic principles. Okay, bureaucracy in all of its forms tends to be amber, conformist. Okay, so the theme here is order, tradition, stability. The structure of an amber organization tends to be hierarchical with rigid rules and rules. And the leadership tends to enforce a rank-based obedience with a chain of command. Now, amber organizations do have some pretty notable strengths. Okay, because they are uniform, they are stable, they are hierarchical, organized. They do tend to be and operate with predictability and repeatability, and they tend to be strong in the areas of long-term planning. But on the shadow side, these amber organizations in the conformist paradigm can also be quite rigid. They can lack innovation because everyone's so used to doing it the way it's always been done. And of course, where conformity is supreme, individuality gets suppressed. And so we lose, access to all of the talent that could otherwise be surfaced if individuality was embraced. Okay, so let's make this interactive. I see we had a couple more folks jump in here on the call. So what comes up for you when you think about an amber organization? I think for me, the red organizations, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, we know what gangs and cartels are like, but amber, it shows up in a lot of different places. So I'm curious, what type of amber organization have you interacted with? Families. Oh yeah. Families absolutely can be amber. Yes. Any other examples of organizations that can be amber or just reflections in general? What is this bringing up for you when you contemplate amber, the conformist paradigm? Public school systems is a really interesting one. I mean, anyone who was educated in a public school system definitely experienced a conformist paradigm. I mean, they would call that a feature, not a bug, but it definitely has costs. At what cost does everyone have to be the same? Military can be amber. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's I think with the military, the chain of command, the rank-based obedience, and then the ability to predict outcomes, like you kind of want that stability. But that doesn't mean that, even militaries cannot evolve in their organizational structures into the future. I think that's always a possibility of evolving. Athletic teams, yeah, definitely. Yeah, for some reason, I keep thinking hospital systems as well. I haven't worked inside of a hospital system directly, but I've been a contractor and I've visited hospitals before, and I've noticed the themes of order, tradition, stability, rigid roles, chain of command. And then even the patients fall into that too. It's like, oh, well, the doctor said this, and the doctor's word is law. Meaning some people fall into that, not everyone. Some people treat doctors as consultants, others treat them as authors. So a lot of that is just a mirror of one's own consciousness, how they relate to what could be considered an authority figure of a doctor. Long-standing restaurant chains. Yeah. Yeah, it's worked for so long. Why change anything? Yeah. Yeah, that's a trap. Okay, so let's consider the mystic parallel to amber organizations. Yes, imperial powers. Yes, non-public businesses. Yeah. Okay, so the mystic parallel is the solar plexus. Okay, so this can represent the law, the priesthood, the moral rule book. This can be the world of shoulds and musts, which, to be clear, can be useful in times of chaos, but often blind to soul. Okay, so we're working our way through the colors here. We've got 3 to go. Let's talk about orange. Orange. So orange is the achievement paradigm. The achievement paradigm. Okay, so just to contrast here, red was impulsive paradigm, amber is conformist paradigm, and now orange is achievement paradigm. Okay, so the metaphor for this is a corporation, a competitive enterprise. The theme here is innovation, efficiency, this concept of meritocracy, right? It's all about achievement. The structure of such an organization is everybody is managed by objectives, and the whole organization tends to be driven by key performance indicators, KPI. And the leadership tends to be goal-oriented, performance-based, success-defined. And there are some strengths to the orange achievement paradigm. One is that they do tend to be innovative. They do tend to welcome new ways of thinking that lead to innovation. An orange organization tends to be welcoming of scientific advancement. And ultimately, a lot of orange organizations have created prosperity. But there's also a shadow side to the orange organization. And that shadow can be burnout. You can think about the people, who literally work themselves into exhaustion trying to achieve. You think about, the people on Wall Street who, develop amphetamine habits because they're trying to keep up or outpace, whoever they're competing against. Right? Or, it's another shadow aspect could be materialism, or this win at all costs mentality, which honestly, sometimes those costs can be very high. You think about the environmental cost of a corporation that has a win at all costs mentality. Okay, so some examples of achievement paradigm corporations, multinationals, a lot of them, Amazon, Goldman Sachs, Silicon Valley startups, Google, there's not that these organizations fit into just one category, but, just to kind of stereotype, a lot of startups, a lot of management consulting firms can fall into this category. Okay, so let's consider this through the mystic frame. In the orange achievement paradigm, this is all about the mind taking over. This is about left brain dominance. We become so focused on architecting external success that we risk becoming spiritually empty. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of tech companies that live here. They live in this space. Okay, so throwing it back to the chat here, what comes to mind when we talk about achievement paradigm, companies with their management by KPI, goal-oriented, performance-based, meritocracy, win at all costs? What is an example, or can you think of a time when you have worked, or maybe now you're working with or for a company that's like this? Just share your reflections in the chat. Ariel says, I find low input variety exists in those spaces. There's not always a ton of diversity of thought. Yeah. Harmony says, I worked at a large publicly traded company worth billions, and internally, it lacked heart and care. It would cut you just to show profits. When I was working with my insurance company, it was very much like this. Okay, I want to pause here real quick. Is this helpful? Is it helpful to go through these stages? We're about halfway through. And, for me personally, being able to see these structured out with characteristics was very revealing for me and gave me a new frame. But I want to make sure that this is resonating. Is this helpful? Okay, great. I'm getting some yeses in the chat. Awesome. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, we're going to continue, and it's getting brighter here. We started in the darkness of the red, and now we're kind of doing a little bit of a social commentary on achievement, but it's getting brighter. Okay, we're starting to move towards green and then teal. Okay, so let's keep it going here. We've got about 20 minutes left. Okay, so let's talk about the green pluralistic paradigm. The green pluralistic paradigm. Okay, so the concept here is that these tend to be family, feel like family style organization. Not to say that aren't families that can exist in these other colors also, but again, we're kind of painting in this is a rough draft of seeing where things fit. Family, community, cooperatives. The theme to a green or pluralistic paradigm organization tends to be empowerment, culture, inclusion. When you're inside of one of these organizations, the structure feels quite flat hierarchies. And leaders in these organizations tend to be driven by values. These leaders, they want to share power. They lead from emotional intelligence, and they prioritize a sense of harmony in the group as a primary leadership objective. Now, strengths for a pluralistic paradigm organization is that it tends to create belonging. People who plug into pluralistic paradigm organizations, they tend to feel like they really are a part of it, and they tend to have a lot of engagement, and they tend to, feel like it's part of their purpose. And green organizations also have a shadow side. Because of the flat hierarchies, pluralistic organization can get stuck in decision paralysis. A green organization can struggle with a lack of direction and sometimes get bogged down by an over focus on creating consensus. Joseph says, the company I work for now is far into transitioning into this green paradigm. And Ariel says, I see a lot of orange orgs disguised as green. Yeah, because green is kind of the, it's kind of a fad to build a culture of inclusion right now. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I think it's ultimately a good thing. But green is also not the last color. So we're actually going to get even brighter when we talk about teal in a minute here. Okay, so what are some examples of green organizations? Well, what comes to mind immediately, most nonprofits. My brother, who I was speaking about at the very beginning, my older brother, he's a consultant for change, for organizations that are going through change, and he specifically nonprofits going through a lot of change, and just as an anecdote here that I think is a teaching moment, there's a lot of retreat centers in the United States of America that are going bankrupt, particularly after the changes to the global economy in 2020. It really did change not only the values of the demographics that typically go to retreat centers. I mean, the values changed, but also the organizations themselves. A lot of them had values and ways of doing business that came from the 70s, the 60s, and the 70s when retreat centers became super popular in the United States. I'm talking about places, like a Methodist retreat center, or a Presbyterian, family getaway, in the mountains of Tennessee. Okay, I'm not talking about Omega or Epsilon. I'm talking, or what is it? Esalen. Sorry, I mispronounced that. Esalen. I'm talking about like these, old retreat centers. So a lot of them are facing bankruptcy because there's simply not the demographic base that was supporting them by coming out and retreating evaporated. And their stuck mentalities of, oh, well, it always, it worked for the last 40 years. It should still work now. And then a lot of the leaders of these retreat centers were in their 50s and 60s and 70s and still thinking like it. Okay, so as an example, so my brother would go into these places and he'd be like, look, if you're going to survive, if you're going to stay open, you're going to have to shift your values in your leadership structure. You're going to have to start to think like the people that you want to serve think. You're gonna have to lead, from within the fray. You can't just hang out on the edge and be like, oh, well, it worked before, it should still work now. Okay, so getting back to this idea of the green pluralistic paradigm, in this case, a lot of these folks were shifting out of more of a, not amber, amber, conformist. They certainly weren't in achievement. They were more conformist. And they're kind of skipping over achievement and trying to get into the pluralistic just to survive. Okay, so nonprofits, NGOs, intentional communities, B Corp, and many progressive education models. Okay, so the mystic parallel here is a pluralistic paradigm. The green organization, that's when the heart opens. The heart opens in the organization. This stage brings healing from the burnout of the orange stage. And yet, it can still struggle to move forward. Because idealism, as beautiful as empowerment, culture, inclusion, flat hierarchies, values-driven leadership, as beautiful as these things are, idealism without structure can still flounder. But nevertheless, the green paradigm organization is still a vital soul initiation. And it's still an important step in the right direction. Okay, so let's talk about the Teal organization. The Teal, which is as far as has been identified so far, but Frédéric in his work openly admits that it's just as far as we can see right now. And that once the world really transitions to mostly green and teal, and we evolve out of this achievement paradigm, which I think some of the developments in AI and automation can help us do. Our values are changing as a society, so we're going to move more towards green and teal, and we're going to move beyond teal into something else, and maybe we just can't see that far yet. But teal right now is what is on the evolutionary horizon. So let's talk about what a teal organization is. So a teal organization falls into the evolutionary paradigm. When you look at a teal organization, you see an ecosystem, a living system. It is rooted and it thrives on self-management, wholeness, and purpose. What's really interesting about this is that the structure, it becomes not centralized or decentralized, but this third word, which is called distributed authority. And this means that the roles of the individuals within the organization become dynamic. Okay, so this is, I'm actually going to share some excerpts from the book here in a minute, but this is that idea of, a key decision needs to be made that involves the budget. And instead of having to go over to the accounting department to try to get someone to sign off, which would be an example of a centralized management, that team that needs to make the expense has in a dashboard all of the metrics that they need to determine whether or not the expense is appropriate. And they have the ability to go ahead and push the button without needing another team to sign off on it. So distributed authority, dynamic roles. So for a moment, this team that's trying to make a decision about spending money, for a moment, they become the accounting department. They're able to actively put on that hat and say, you know what, we are running, our risk assessment. We feel this is a valid expenditure, so we're going to go ahead and pull the trigger. Okay. Now, a lot of centralized organizations would shudder at the thought. Okay. But again, this is a new paradigm. Okay. So it implies that there's some deep strengths to a teal organization. And those strengths are innovation plus soul alignment. And with that comes adaptability and also this evolutionary flow. Okay, so it's, this organization, a teal organization, nobody inside the organization or even outside the organization sees it as something static. Okay, they see it as this living, fluctuating ecosystem. Okay, so that's where this evolutionary flow comes in. It's like, oh, we're radiating and emanating at all times as an organization. We're evolving, from one minute to the next. We're a living system. Okay, so there is a shadow here, as with everything. The shadow is that these evolutionary paradigm systems tend to be kind of fragile in the face of old paradigm systems. Okay, because they're new, they're cutting edge. Not everybody's on board yet. Most of us were raised in achievement paradigms, older paradigms. So it's new and it's a bit of a stretch, and that can make it fragile in the face of old paradigm systems. And it can also make it invisible to the mainstream, because let's face it, a teal organization, it's very cutting edge. The mainstream isn't there yet, although the most visionary leaders among us are thinking in this way. And that's why naturally we're talking about this on our Friday Visionary Leadership Call, because most visionary people are thinking about this already, even if it is still invisible in the mainstream. Okay, so there's a couple examples here. There's a company called Bertzorg, which is a Dutch healthcare collective. I was reading a case study about them. I may post that in a follow-up in the forum. It's really quite fascinating. Patagonia is well known for being a teal paradigm organization. Holacracy-based organizations. Holacracy. Will someone please look up the word holacracy and place a definition in the chat? We're going to crowdsource that. I need a definition of the word holacracy. HOLACRACY. And of course, conscious spiritual startups, such as those that we are incubating through the Guild, most of them are going to be Teal organizations because that just matches where we are in consciousness as evolving consciousness systems, our NIOS. Okay, thank you, Ariel. Holacracy is a decentralized organizational system where authority and decision making are distributed across self organizing teams rather than being held by a traditional management hierarchy. Okay, so you can tell in this hour-long leadership call, we're just scratching the surface. We could go so much deeper into any of these ideas, but ultimately, I wanted to introduce it so that we can start to talk about what it means to begin to adapt a teal frame of mind, and also begin to, craft ourselves as visionary leaderships in a teal paradigm. Because when we ground this, we can reach back to earlier stages in other organizations, and we can thrive, and also have that ability to evolve built in because we're already thinking at the next level. Okay, so let's bring in the mystic lens of a teal evolutionary paradigm organization. So the mystic parallel here is that this is the crown chakra plus a state of heart coherence. Okay, so this is not just the left brain focus of ambition and achievement. This is actually whole system coherence. So it's coherence between the heart, the head brain, and the gut brain. Okay, and then the crown chakra, meaning that we are whole and integrated and radiating. Okay, and now that translated into a paradigm of an organizational structure. Okay, that's teal. So teal is where mystic authorship becomes organizational structure. The soul and the system are no longer in opposition to each other. They are integrated. It becomes one thing, the soul and the system. Okay, so when we launch a teal organization, we stop running a business and we begin co-creating with the soul of the work itself. I'm going to say that one more time because that's the bottom line right there. In a teal organization, we stop running a business and we start co-creating with the soul of the work itself. Okay, so we're going to do a couple chat prompts here, and then we'll wrap up for today. Okay, so which frequency are you currently leading from, or do you find yourself recreating in your work, your teams, or your systems? Okay, so here's the exact prompt for this. And you can muse on it yourself or share in the chat. I welcome either. I see myself leading from blank, and I notice it shows up in how I'm going to give you a moment to consider that and to share if you would like to. Okay, so one share here says, I see myself leading from burnout and exhaustion, and I notice it shows up in how I dread coming to work most days. Thank you for sharing that. I do have a follow-up question coming, but I want to wait for the folks that are still typing. Another share in the chat here says, I see myself leading from teal or perhaps a different color not on the map. And I notice it shows up in how I prefer a fascia first approach in friendships and how I try to bring that approach to any work interactions. For example, I worked for a couple of companies where I would set my own agenda for a one on one the day before and request space for yoga, dance, meditation, qigong, or a soulful check in the first few minutes before getting into logistics. Another share says, I see myself leading from teal. Almost all business models are based on orange. I've tried numerous times to start my own business, but always found something not resonating, and now I start to see why. Thank you for sharing that. Also, when I'm thinking of how I want to collaborate when I create my business, I'm pretty clear on fascia first and authenticity and wholeness, not fake smiles and faux everything's fine. Yeah. Sandy's, oh, are we supposed to say a color? My company is orange, so that's where I'm leading from, and I feel it in my exhaustion. Yeah. Well, it's helpful to see it that way. Yeah, to identify the archetype that the company is fitting into. Okay, so follow up question here, and if you're typing to answer the last question, proceed. I'm going to continue with the follow up though because we're coming up on time. What would it look like to lead from your wholeness? And there's another way to ask this question that might crack it wide open. So I'm going to ask it another way. If your work were a living being, what would it want from you right now? Another share in the chat. I see myself leading from excitement and joy with my neighborhood association. And I notice it shows up in how I visit my neighbors and check in on them. Okay, another comment from the chat here. Wholeness and living being approach for me is creating a system that can meet me where I am with space to learn, grow, and self regulate. A seasonal approach, one that allows for different ways of showing up on lower energy or lower states days. Yeah. Any other comments about what would it look like to lead from your wholeness and how that would change your presence, your team, your impact? Okay, some shares from the chat here. For example, I wouldn't have to fake it or self abandon in order to show up for the work. Space for all states and nourishment that elevates state within the workflows. Another comment says wholeness would look like people and even sustainability over profits. Well said, yes. Flexibility. We are all different beings. One may work best in 10-hour days, 4 days a week. Another may work best from home. Another may work best 1 week on, 1 week off. I would lead based on individual needs and not the standard 8 to 5 strapped to a chair. And Joseph says it would be putting all the effort almost exclusively on the desired state and having everyone on board with this vision. Everything should work out effortlessly. And Ariel says, hire me. Yes. I love that. The flexibility. That is a key trait of a Teal organization, the flexibility. And then also understanding. So when I'm a manager of a achievement-based organization, I need you in that chair 24/7 because you need to be outputting. I need output, output, output. Okay. But when I'm a manager of a Teal organization, it's like I know that when you are taking care of yourself first, that's when you have the highest chance of a quality output. Okay, so now quality becomes more important than quantity, right? So, when I'm running my teams and we're working on a project, I want self-care is the most important first thing because the project is going to suffer if the people are suffering. Okay, so it's and being able to see that as this holistic view of the organization. Organization is only as healthy as its components, as its people. Yeah. Um, okay, so in the chat, I see community, healing, creativity, and devotion. Yes. Imagining wisely as a team. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, it's 4. Let's go ahead and wrap up here. So I have a closing invocation. I'm going to read it twice. First time so you can hear it and kind of merge your intelligence with it. And then the second time so that you can repeat after me if it feels right to do so, either out loud or in your mind. Closing invocation. I lead not from authority, but from alignment. I listen to the soul of my work. I act as a steward of emergence. I am whole. I am attuned. I am sovereign. Okay, I'm going to read that a second time, and you have the opportunity to say it out loud after me or in your mind. Affirm this. I lead not from authority, but from alignment. I listen to the soul of my work. I act as a steward of emergence. I am whole. I am attuned. I am sovereign. Take a breath with me. All right, that's it for Friday, June 20th, 2025, Visionary Leadership Call. Thank you, everyone who hopped on. We're going to do this again next week, and I'll see you all then. Imagine wisely, my friends. Have a great weekend.